Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really captivating paper by Marc Bates titled Architectural Polemics, the Marwanid Origins of the Dome of the Rock and the Unfolding of the Biblical Promise Plan. We are traveling back to the late 7th century to uncover the exact physical origins of one of the world's most recognizable structures. You know, we always hear these grand legends about why the Dome of the Rock was originally built. But today, we're tossing the later stories aside to look at the hard physical evidence left behind in the year 72 AH. If you aren't familiar with the term AH, stands for Anno Hijra, or after the Hijra, the Islamic calendar. That's roughly 691 to 692 CE for those using the Gregorian calendar. And let me tell you, the original stones and those earliest inscriptions tell a much wilder, much more complex political and theological story than the myths we usually hear. Here is our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover uncovering 72 AH, a dialogue in stone, messages in the Mosaics, debunking retroactive myths, and finally, the theology of space. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. Uncovering 72 AH, the Marwanid synthesis.
Moving right along to Section 2, a dialogue in stone, architectural conversations. Okay, so to really grasp what's going on with this building, we need to drop ourselves into the late 7th century. The Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik is in the middle of a massive political crisis. We're talking about the Second Fitna, a bitter civil war. Plus, he's facing intense ideological pressure from Christian Byzantium right there in Jerusalem. I mean, the city's skyline was literally dominated by these massive Byzantine monuments. So how does the Arab Empire establish political legitimacy and religious identity? Through monumental architecture. The Dome of the Rock wasn't built in a vacuum. It was designed as a direct, deliberate conversation with those existing Christian monuments. It actually mirrors the late antique commemorative tradition of the Anastasis, which is Greek for resurrection, but you probably know it better as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Just look at the shared visual vocabulary here. You've got an octagonal outer shell and a circular inner arcade housing the foundation stone, directly echoing the circular rotunda of the Anastasis housing the empty tomb of Jesus. It's all about projecting sovereignty and holiness. Now, this is where it gets really fascinating. Check out these dome diameters. The Anastasis dome is about 20.9 meters across. The Dome of the Rock? Approximately 20.2 meters. That is not a coincidence, and it certainly wasn't a blind copy. A 70-centimeter difference is essentially a staggering architectural flex. It was a deliberate, highly calculated visual competition playing out right on the Jerusalem skyline. Imagine this elevated, gold-sheathed dome sitting proudly on the Temple Mount platform, specifically engineered and designed to confront the Christian rotunda just across the valley. Section 3. Messages in the Mosaics, the 72 AH inscriptions. All right, let's step inside the monument. When we do, we're hit with 240 meters of the earliest securely datable Quranic material written right onto the mosaic walls in Kufic script, that highly stylistic early form of Arabic. And the builders didn't just pick random verses. They carefully curated this text to broadcast a very specific theological message. Starting in the inner ambulatory, that's the circular walking aisle near the center, the author argues these verses act as a direct Christological correction to the Christian majority city outside. It explicitly addresses Jews and Christians as people of the Scripture, defines Jesus purely as a messenger, word, and spirit, and point-blank refutes the Trinity with the command, "Say not three." Then, as we move out to the outer ambulatory, the focus shifts heavily to divine sovereignty, explicitly denying divine sonship. Remember the context here. This text is wrapping around an inner space decorated with brilliant glass mosaics showing royal crowns, diadems, and imperial insignia. It's quite literally displaying the physical trophies of conquered empires, Byzantium and Sasanian Persia. So you have this overwhelming visual dominance pairing anti-Trinitarian text with the actual spoils of war hanging right above the heads of the visitors. Talk about a power move, right? This rapid-fire quoting across the structure creates what the author describes as a monumental Tawhid liturgy. Tawhid being that core Islamic concept of the indivisible oneness of God. But the absolute genius of it is how the architecture literally forces the visitor to physically engage with it. Because it's placed on circular walls, you have to walk in continuous circles, effectively reading and participating in a physical theological argument. The whole building functions as this unapologetic theological proclamation, written in glittering mosaic, dropped right into the heart of a city so deeply tied to the Christian narrative of incarnation. Now here is a crucial takeaway. This script, It's not the finalized 1924 Cairo edition of the Quran that we know today. Epigraphers, the experts who study and decode these ancient inscriptions, point out that the 72 text has different word orders, conflated verses, and early textual fluidity. And honestly, what it leaves out is highly conspicuous. If this whole thing was meant to be a total, complete refutation of Christian doctrine, you'd naturally expect to see the verse denying the crucifixion of Jesus, but it's just not there. Instead, the text hyperfocuses on God's ultimate power over Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection. Which brings us to Section 4, Debunking Retroactive Myths, Stones versus Stories. So, now that we have a solid grip on the hard, epigraphic evidence of 72 we need to talk about how the author systematically dismantles the later historical narratives. Because, as centuries passed, new theological and political needs popped up. And so, retroactive stories were projected backward onto the origins of the dome. These are called etiologies, which are basically after-the-fact origin stories created to explain something that already exists. According to the source, there are 3 major stories that simply don't align with the primary archaeological data. The famous story that the dome was built to commemorate the prophet's night journey and ascension, the tale of Caliph Umar discovering the site as a Christian dung heap, and modern theories claiming early mosques were oriented toward Petra instead of Mecca. When we actually pit the physical truths of the stones against these retroactive stories, the contrasts are pretty stark. Take the night journey. There is total silence in the 240 meters of original inscriptions. Absolutely no mention of the ascent whatsoever. And the dung heap story? Completely missing from contemporary Christian itineraries. The author points out it was likely just a linguistic pun, a mocking twist on the Arabic name for the Christian Church of the Resurrection to mean refuse, transferring that insulting label over to the Temple Mount. And the Petra Qibla theory? Well, it relies entirely on modern mathematical azimuths, totally ignoring how early builders actually used folk astronomy, like specific sunrises and cardinal directions, to orient their monumental structures. And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, the Theology of Space, Competing Paradigms. Let's zoom out for a second. Beyond the physical architecture, there's a profound clash of theological frameworks competing for the ultimate sacred center of the world. The text neutrally contrasts the Islamic paradigm of inspiration, the word taking the form of an uncreated book, against the Christian paradigm of incarnation, where the eternal word becomes flesh. This is a vital, categorical asymmetry. Think about it. If Revelation is a perfectly preserved book, any textual variant threatens the whole system. But if Revelation is a person, then the scriptures serve as an inspired historical witness to that person. And this isn't just abstract theology. It completely changes what kind of buildings you construct. If Revelation is a book, you build a space specifically to recite it. If it's a person, the architectural focus shifts entirely. To unpack that Christian theological framework, the author utilizes scholar Walter C. Kaiser Jr.'s Promise Plan. It maps out a continuous, organic biblical trajectory moving from the very beginning in Genesis all the way to Jesus. It's presented as a progressively unfolding divine word. It starts with the promise of a seed to crush the serpent, moves through the covenants with Abraham, Moses, and David, and goes all the way to the new covenant and the incarnate climax in John 1:14. Within this theological view, it's an unbroken chain that actually doesn't cancel out the earlier promises made to ethnic Israel. Following this biblical trajectory, the plan culminates in the incarnate Messiah acting as the true temple. This transcends the need for a localized stone sanctuary. Sure, the earlier sanctuaries, the tabernacle, the Solomonic temple, those were physical places where God's glory dwelt. But in this theological framework, Jesus identifies his own body as the ultimate temple. In him, that old requirement for a physical sacred center on Mount Moriah is fulfilled. The whole paradigm of what sacred space actually means shifts entirely from a stationary building to a living person. So, bringing it all together, the source concludes that while empires build magnificent stone monuments like the Dome of the Rock to claim sacred space and political sovereignty, the biblical response remains a non-supersessionist hope for all peoples. To put it simply, non-supersessionist means that the new inclusion of all peoples into this covenant doesn't replace or supersede God's original promises to ethnic Israel. But according to this framework, building a permanent monument that denies divine sonship acts as an architectural refusal of that promise plan's climax. And that creates an incredible ongoing visual and theological tension right in the heart of Jerusalem. I want to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder regarding the true legacy of 72 AH. Is this magnificent structure primarily a testament to the political ambitions and architectural genius of an earthly empire trying to cement its legacy? Or does its very existence highlight a deeper, ongoing theological conversation about where and how the divine truly dwells among us? Definitely something to think about the next time you see that famous golden dome shining on the Jerusalem skyline. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible historical investigation through the physical stones and complex stories of the Dome of the Rock. Catch you on the next explainer.